whole purpose of Culturevist is to help people just to discover what are companies like practically doing to improve or shape their culture and people experience. If there's anything you want to hear more about, the idea is you get a glimpse now, and then you can connect and start your own conversations afterwards. So with that, we're going to start with the introductions.
Hey, my name is Christian. I'm one of two co-founders of a technology platform called Soyas. And we are a people and culture platform that help companies work on things like leadership or people experience or the culture of the company.
Hi, I'm Rachel. So I am an American girl living in Barcelona, Spain. A little bit about me before I jump into exactly what I do. So I love being in the sea, running self-restorative experiments, trying new hobbies, and then really exploring the world with my partner. And then I also love my cat. His name is Raymond. I'm the founder of Boldly Unbounded Leadership, where I help ambitious female leaders move into their personal power and lead confidently without the burnout. I also partner with remote companies to help them intentionally design a remote workplace that unlocks high performance as well as high compassion teams. And so prior to this life, I led the people and culture function at multiple globally remote startups. And I'm also an ICF certified coach with a focus in mindfulness.
Hi, I'm Marie Krebs. I'm the head of people experience design at a gaming studio called Build a Rocket Boy. We're building like experiences that blur the lines between reality and the digital world. And what people experience design means is that we're building the products, the projects that will help all of the people at Build a Rocket Boy do their best work.
Hi, everyone. I'm Adam. I'm one of two co-founders at a company called OpenOrg. We launched earlier this year, and we're on a mission to help companies rebuild trust with employees by bringing transparency to the world of work. So we spotted that the trends around engagement plummeting globally, attrition rising, and that employee-employer trust eroding quite heavily. So we've got a framework that we take to companies to help them inject more transparency into how they attract, hire, pay, develop people, but also how they work and communicate specifically as well around communication and culture. So we run cohorts for like people and HR folks to help them embrace and understand more about how they can drive change within their business. But we also have like an accreditation program that we work with companies on to guide and coach them to whatever contextual level of transparency works for them long term.
Bringing my dulcet brummy tones to the party. I'm Donna. I am the founder and owner of Learning Partner Solutions. I focus on developing emotionally intelligent leaders, teams, and workplaces. So working with big organisations all the way through to one-man band entrepreneurs, using a whole range of learning experiences. So I design, deliver, coach, mentor, facilitate. I'm accredited by EMC as a senior practitioner, and I love learning. So I definitely bring that passion and enthusiasm that I have for learning and for people, and use that to help raise awareness and support people in growing their emotional intelligence.
I love it, and let's do it. Let's learn. So the first person we're going to hear from today is Christian. Over to you.
Perfect, thank you. What I might add to my very short introduction, knowing I was the first presenter, is that I'm not a people person by background. I was previously a middle manager, so a lot of my experience comes from that, the hard challenges of trying to lead a team. But I've increased my knowledge within the people and HR space over the past couple of years working with it, and I'm also now part of the Forbes HR Council and other things where I get to learn also from experts like you guys on how to apply what I know about technology and data in a very exciting people space. So that's also sort of the case I brought here. I thought about what excites me, and hopefully that will excite you as well and fuel a good conversation. So I wanted to tell a case about an e-commerce company with around 100 employees that we helped. They were using Sawyers to measure employee well-being, but also you could call it engagement or satisfaction, but combining it with personality, so specific personality or talent traits. And the situation was that, like many companies of that size, even if you're larger, like their people team fluctuated between being 1 and 2 people. And as you know, and some of you can imagine, some of you know from firsthand experience, that leaves very little time for analyses, for data insights, or even for executing on all the things that you want to do in the first place. And that's part of why they chose to work with Sawyers, because it is primarily for middle-sized companies, not for the huge enterprises and the giants of the world, because it's very intuitive, and the different modules speak together intuitively without having to do that work, which will become essential for the rest of the case here. And lastly, what's important about Sawyers that they fell for is also that we deploy a very similar approach and model for all customers, so that we can learn from everyone and not having to basically learn everything for ourselves. So we don't have to discover how to do things the first time every time. So that was the situation. And the challenge was, first of all, that you got to be really picky and really careful about the people battles you choose to focus on. Because when you are a team of 1 or 2, even 5 people in a people team, time is the most delicate resource you have in most teams like that. And for example, would it be great to design new career paths? Sure. Would it be great to align our compensation structure? Sure. Would it be great to develop a new structure for development conversations, or even train or host training for managers on how to facilitate those? All good ideas. And I could probably easily list the first 40, 50 quite time-consuming actions that most people in HR teams would love to do. And that would probably to some extent be a good idea. But as I said, you really got to pick your battles to deliver value for both the people in the organization, the business, and management. You want to look good and you want to drive impact. And their key complication, the key problem they were looking at was, or at least that's where they started, they asked themselves, what is the most critical people battle right now? And that's actually often a very hard question to answer in the first place, but a good place to start. And for them, it was understanding whether there was something to be done about the employee turnover rate, like Adam mentioned, the attrition rates for their customer success team, because that seemed to be one of the more critical challenges for them to solve. So the question was, what is the most effective way to minimize attrition and basically increase employee retention in that customer success department? What will have the most impact? And what we found in their case was that, what they learned using the platform was that nearly every third person in the department was a personality archetype we call futurist. And every framework has a different terminology, and that's not important here. They had very frequently hired these people because futurists are flexible, they're helpful, they're great starters, they're welcoming, and they have a general great vibe, good energy. Many of the people in the department were students, so they had quite high turnover rates just because of that. But actually what they found was that futurists were only stayed on average for 8 months, whereas 3 other personality archetypes that were more ideal for the position stayed on average for 15 months. So you could ask why. Well, the company did not intentionally hire futurists. That just happened to be the case. And the problem was that the futurists that they hired are also very much driven heavily by starting new projects, generating ideas, and typically actually struggle with admin work and get drained from very repetitive work and tasks. So maybe not a great fit for managing tickets and being very structured in your work. And the data was very clear on this. They would reduce annual employee turnover rate by 23% simply by not hiring futurists in the future. That wouldn't fit and thrive in the position, thrive with the work they had to do. So I thought that's a really interesting case. And of course, we don't believe personality assessment should be used deterministically, but used for driving good conversations. But even so, it's helped them improve retention a lot in that department. And the next thing they did was they went to look at, again, because the data speaks together intuitively or natively, they were able to see what are the most important drivers of engagement and well-being for the three ideal archetypes, personality archetypes. And they were able to also increase well-being and retention for those three ideal archetypes that would make up the future success of the department. And in total, they were able to improve retention by 31%. Relatively 32 percentage points, almost identical have in this particular case, but normally fluctuates quite differently. And the reason I love this case so much is because it wasn't tough, it wasn't complicated, it wasn't super time consuming, but it had an incredible impact for both the people, finding more people that would fit and have a good time doing the work, which is what our mission is about. But it also benefited the business and the organization, which is what we believe is necessary for sustainable impact, like benefiting both sides of the table. So it's very much about choosing your battles and doing the right thing for the right reasons. And basically, to quote the great Abraham Lincoln, if I had 6 hours to cut down a tree, I'll spend the first 4 hours sharpening the axe. So that's the case I wanted to bring today, and also get the rest of the you guys' take on.
I mean, I think it's super cool idea of how can you create these archetypes and think about how can we be more strategic, because that's what I hear. It's like being a lot more strategic and intentional. I'm really curious, like, how do you think about the human component so the team members don't feel like they're put into a box? Because that's the other side. I'd be really curious, like if I'm on the receiving end and maybe don't understand it fully, it's like, oh, so you see me just as this, but I'm more than this. And so I'm curious, like, how do you approach that in terms of communicating with the team and moving through transition so people feel like it's still holistic, but also strategic?
No, I think it's a very important topic, and something to be completely frank, that's very hard to balance, like utilizing the insights and the tools we have to get a better general understanding of who people are without boxing them in, without saying you are an introvert or an extrovert, like it's binary. And that's one of the things we don't fall into with our approach to personality archetypes. But there are still a degree where it's either so nuanced and complex that the managers aren't able to use it because there are no simple heuristics in day-to-day work. And on the other end of the spectrum, you're yellow, green, or blue in a disk profile, and they can remember it and utilize it, even though they sometimes miscategorize you as a person or put you in a too small box. So I think it's a very interesting conversation how to navigate that in general. And I wouldn't say we have the perfect solution for that, just that sometimes when I ask myself about the ethical or moral implications of using stuff like this, I generally tend towards like we manage to find more people that would fit in a position and have a good time doing it, which is a success. And I actually think there will be sacrifices along the way where maybe someone was overlooked for a position because they were futurist, for example, even though they would potentially be a good match in that particular case. And balancing the trade-offs there is very difficult. But as on a whole, I think it benefits everyone. But there are many nuances that are interesting to delve into there.
This is a topic that fascinates me because I use personality profiling in my work. And I think the value of any of those tools is that it gives a collective, a common framework and language through which to discuss similarities and differences. It's a way of providing words that everybody is clear on the meaning of, to be able to get curious about how that plays out, what that means for us in our working environment, what that means for our culture, what that means for your personal development, what that means for your relationships in the workplace. I am not a fan of anybody being labelled as any one thing or not as another thing. So it's about how we introduce and facilitate those conversations, providing that level of language so that it is useful rather than categorical.
What I'd like to sort of see companies do with this information, I guess, from my point of view, and I'm coming at this more from like a hiring, talent attraction perspective, maybe, is not make too many knee-jerk reactions around like, what do we have to do with the current team, or what do we only have to hire for in the future? But can we use this information and data that's clearly telling us this type of person tends to be more successful in this team, to be more honest when hiring? So not close off to hiring other personalities or traits, but like actually saying, FYI, this is the team you're joining. The data tells us that attrition rate, if you're this profile, tends to be here, and attrition rate tends to be here if you're this profile, and that's cool. But we're just being upfront and honest about the type of person that succeeds here. And I think you can use that information to become a lot more honest when hiring, and that will, over time, in my view, add a lot to improving some of the metrics without having to make too many knee-jerk reactions. At least you've been upfront and honest about it as well when having that conversation.
Yeah, we always use it as a tool for conversation, and already the first interview. And right now, like we always do feedbacks at the first interview when we've done the personality assessment to figure out where did it land wrong, or do they see it differently, and use it to also spark conversations around some of the traits we fear that might make them not feel great in a specific position, and challenge that. And maybe they turn out that they don't see it in a similar way, and maybe we get conviction around them, even though whatever the personality assessment said. And I think Donna is also like incredibly right in terms of using it as a common vocabulary for having deeper conversations around this, where we get some words to use to deploy for having these conversations in a more aligned manner. And also what I thought of when you said that, Adam, is there's also a fun paradox between, on the one end of the spectrum, there must clearly be some people that are better suited for specific types of work and tasks, parts of the project or whatever. And on the other end of the spectrum, we know from the scientific literature that on average, high levels of cognitive diversity in a team leads to better performance as well. So it's also balancing those two things. We don't just want everybody to be this one person, but at the same time, we acknowledge the fact that some people might be better suited for specific type of position, which makes it hard to balance completely. But I think it gives a lot of information, and the data can tell you a lot about where to look and how to prioritize what to do.
I think it's a great point relating it back to the recruitment process, because actually that's a real opportunity for candidates learning. And anything that opens that conversation around raising somebody's self-awareness, understanding the strengths that they've got, but also the flip side of the coin to that, whether they're successful in this role or they go on to apply for another role, that's beneficial, right?
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So there is some similarity, there's some relevance to the next session. So Adam, over to you.
Thanks. So try and have a think about what I can contribute here from a culture, people experience perspective. And despite me introducing myself as co-founder of OpenOrg, the example or the case study, as it were, that I'm going to lean on here is actually from my previous company where I was co-founder for a couple of years. So it was a company called Scout. It was an embedded talent business that we launched just coming out of the pandemic. And my role there was co-founder, but internal facing, so focused on people ops, culture. How do we scale? How do we look after people and grow, etc. So had a huge focus on how we hire, how we attract, hire, and retain people. And starting from scratch, blank canvas, we both agreed, just the two of us, that we wanted to take a very open approach, open, transparent approach to how we build this business and hire and attract people. We had some reasons for doing that, but we defaulted effectively to a really transparent hiring process. So I wouldn't call it radical necessarily, but from day one, we identified and built out and shared very transparent salary bands. We had a public Notion, something that had been inspired by from working with clients previously, and they always said, I want to have one of these. I want to build a public handbook. So we did that from day one. Set out building very clear interview stages that we also then shared from day one as well. But also intentionally having very, very open, transparent conversations with people at first stage of hiring, in an attempt to actually repel people, put them off, show them why this isn't going to be the right place for you. As we were growing, I handled the first conversation of every interview process we had. So it was nice to be able to do that as founder and actually show people like, this is what's great about working here, but actually this is the reality. And this is why it might not be something you want to do. So it was something a little bit new. We pushed the boundaries a little bit versus what we both done previously, but we had reasons for doing that and some context around that with our particular business. For anyone who knows embedded talent companies, effectively, we work with typically fast growing, scaling tech companies who need to grow quickly, need to hire quickly, but don't necessarily want to put all that resource into a permanent talent team. So we'd give them a talent partner on a contract, so on and so forth, that would be embedded in their business effectively. So we were hiring people that would be changing clients every 6 to 9 months. And the reality of that world actually is you're a consulting business. So as much as they're our employees and we want to look after them and do the right things, we're slightly hamstrung by client requirements, what clients need, what they want. So we knew there'd be some limitations by what we can offer and what we can do for people. And we wanted to be very honest about that where we could up front. But my experience with this industry also told me previously that people use embedded talent companies as a stepping stone to go from a recruitment agency background into internal. This was a perfect stepping stone for them to get some accelerated internal experience and then one day get a permanent job internally somewhere. I knew that, very aware of it. There's no point in hiding that. So I was often very upfront with people, as an example, in an interview, to say, look, you aren't going to be working here forever. You might give us a year or 2 years. I know that that's fine. But we've taken a very open approach to handling that situation when it happens, and we want to be adults about it. So that's just one example of one of the things we sort of very openly talked about and the reasons why we did that, because we had some specific nuance to the type of business we had. So I guess just turning to what we specifically did to create that, the foundations to enable us to have that transparent hiring process. From day one, we built out our own public handbook, but we had an internal and an external one. We sort of split it off. Some people do it slightly differently, but I spent many nights at like 3-4 a.m. with a new baby strapped to me, just typing out on my phone and building that out, and loved it. But we piled everything in there, like created our interview process, hiring hub, like bands, all sorts of stuff. And we put it all in there. So that was the sort of foundation for making sure we had the information to share with people. Secondary to that was understanding what we actually wanted and needed as a business. I'm all for being people first and giving people what they want, but I think I'm also a big believer in companies having to identify what do we need as a business to be successful? What do we need from people, and what's going to work for us? Because if you don't get that right, you're failing the people that you hire anyway, long term. So understanding what we needed, what we wanted, and the nuances involved in that were really key. You can't just, in that world, hire any agency recruiter, for example, and they'll succeed. They actually, most of them won't succeed in our environment. So it's understanding the who will succeed in your company and being able to share that with people so they can understand what that means. And then we also pushed that out. We communicated that in job descriptions, careers pages, and also in interviews as well. So as I said, I ran those first stages, so I was able to play that really honest filter with people as founder. One of the biggest examples of that was talking to people very openly about salary. We'd published salary bands. So everyone came in knowing typically that the band was probably around only about £5,000 in width. So you had a fairly clear idea as to where you were going to land in a particular level. But we had a commission structure on top, which was very, very minimal. And I was very keen to chat to people about that specifically and say that you're coming from a world of agency recruitment, for example, that is very money motivated and where you probably make most of your money from commission. This is being flipped. And if you're looking for an environment where you can earn a lot of money, this is not it. Like, don't join us if you want to earn good money. We don't pay actually as high as you'll earn elsewhere. You join us for other reasons. So I found slightly different ways of saying that, but it was still very honest in terms of showing people that this is not the place for you if you want to earn a lot of cash. This is the place for you if you want to do this, and this. So really focusing on understanding what we need, but also showing people that during that interview process, through copy, through interviews, and so on and so forth. In terms of what we saw off the back of that, we thrived. We really, really thrived. We, like anyone else who's probably hires during that time, around 2020, 2021, will know that loads of people scaled quite quickly. It was a bit of a bubble, and an interesting time. But it was really interesting. We had our own clients and companies asking us how on earth we were able to attract so many people so quickly and also hold on to them, because as much as it was very easy to hire people at that time, it was also very, very easy to hire people from other companies and poach them. People were moving around a lot, but we were retaining people, even though we didn't pay particularly well versus some other companies. And there were internal recruitment roles being offered on the market in 2021, paying double what we were paying our team. And they were being poached left, right, and center from their clients, but they stayed with us. They held. And that for me is an indication that we've done something very well, not just at hiring stage with regards to setting expectations, but also that's impacted our culture, our people experience from day one when you have that first interaction. Because if people had been joining us with that money motivation in the back of their mind, they would have been jumping ship the earliest opportunity they had. But we had people in the business who didn't care about money. They weren't here for that. So they didn't care when people started throwing salaries at them from outside. And because of that, we grew fast. Like we went from 2 people to 75, I think, in about 18 months. And the reason we grew so quickly was we weren't losing anyone. We had 1 or 2 along the way leave. They maybe joined the client, or we obviously had a couple who weren't quite right for environment. That always happens. But nearly everyone that joined us was a slam dunk during that time. Bar 1 or 2 exceptions. So the big learn for us on that is that for us anyway, transparency was when hiring is super, super powerful. For me, it impacts cultural alignment, sets expectations from day one, reduces ramp up time, and improves opportunity to level up on like performance and growth and retention. And even though that's a historic example for my last business, that's something that is fed into launching OpenOrg now. How can we help companies to level up to become more transparent when they attract, hire, and retain people, and understand the benefits around that?
I'm really curious, Adam. I love the way that you talk about transparency and setting expectations right from the get-go. What do you think causes organisations to be resistant to that approach?
It's ironically, it's the radical examples of companies out there that maybe have made this a little bit harder, because you say the word transparency to a typical CEO founder or something at the moment, and they tense up and they get all anxious because they hear transparency and they think pay transparency, and then they think pay transparency means having to share my salary and my bonuses with everyone, and they think of like a Buffer, if anyone's familiar with that. So Buffer are amazing, we love them, but they've made our job a little bit harder as well, and that's what everyone thinks when they see transparency. That's not what we're trying to do. So we have a heap of educating and calming to do when we speak to companies to say, when we talk about transparency, we're talking about the little things like baby steps, share hiring processes, onboarding processes, share some basic salary details, share your, maybe some things like employee engagement scores. And these are non-scary things. But if you share them, they're really powerful. And I don't think companies appreciate how much candidates and applicants from outside really appreciate having that information up front. And it's a simple flick of a switch. So yeah, there's some resistance to it, but it's a mindset thing that you can get around.
But why not have paid transparency?
That's a good. That's my argument, is that we all want to work towards that. I think there's people out there who obviously are divided and have reasons against it. There's some very valid reasons for not having paid transparency as well, I have to say, and that for me is more around making sure the business is set up and can do it. It's not, you can't just go and throw some salary bands out there and say go for it. You need to make sure your managers are enabled to have conversations with employees in their team. If they haven't got the coaching, the ability, the enablement to handle those conversations, because people will come to them, then that will cause issues. So you've got a heap of work to do at manager level to understand, to equip them with the right communication tools, etc. But you also then have to have the other things that go around it. Career development framework, performance framework. Once you throw bands out there, people want to know, okay, what's my next one? And also then how do I get to that? So that's when you need to have a solid performance framework. And companies, rightly so, are often wanting to do this, but are saying, hey, I need some time to get this together, because it's going to be dangerous otherwise. So that's where it's not good to rush in.
Okay, Marie. So I know you did a lot. You led a lot of this work when you were at Learnably. What came to mind when you've heard what Adam has been talking about?
I was thinking about what is the first simplest step that anyone who's not in a position to open source a process could take. So I totally agree, like onboarding, very low risk process to open source. But what if you have challenges and you're just not in a position? What if you're, I don't know, in a very super high competitive industry and there's no way that open sourcing is a wise move to make? Like there's a lot of circumstances that could mean you're not in a place to open source your work as such. And so it may sound counterintuitive, but I would recommend starting by having transparent conversations, sharing the challenges that you're facing. And it starts, as early as the hiring process. It's counterintuitive. Don't try to sell your company. Just try to put people off, because then whoever joins will know what they're in for and will know why they're joining, because it will have been their decision. And so it's much harder to second guess, or if you do, it will be for much different reasons than if you're just sold something and you buy it and you bring it home and you're like, I already had 3 vases.
Completely agree, Marie. And just final point for me on that, I suppose, to answer your question a tiny bit as well, is there's some really basic, simple things that companies are missing out on that and they have to be doing. That it's not even a question of should we or could we. Get a hiring process on your job ads or your career site. Make it clear. Make it set some expectations. But the amount of career sites and job ads that we look at, and the high percentage that don't make it very, very clear and obvious about when we work and where we work. Like, what are our hours? What does hybrid mean? What does companies just put flexible hours on a job ad? It's terrible, like really terrible. So that's probably for me the one first thing you should start with is make it very clear to people from day one when they apply, when and where do we work. And that's a little baby step, but it's something that shouldn't be non-scary. It's not a negotiable at all.
Okay, so next we're going to hand over to Rachel.
Cool, thank you. I had to have a think about this, because I was like, what will actually offer value and maybe some meaningful conversation, because there's so much that we could cover within the umbrella of people and culture. And I landed on something that I care very deeply about, which is how do you nurture trust and foster a culture of co-creation. And the reason why I think this is really important to talk about is a lot of workplaces struggle with trust. I've been through multiple rifts or layoffs, and you see the impact of that on a team, but also the small day-to-day. So talking about transparency, right? That's a huge trust builder. But then the other piece related to that is how do we make sure that we're really co-creating the culture that we have? We do have the guides of values, of our mission, of our vision, of our priorities, but it's how do we choose to show up and interact with each other every single day? That is the culture. And so as a people leader, I wanted to talk a little bit about a practice that I have used across the past few startups that has really been quite amazing. It's worked really well. And it also feels really human. You're probably going to hear me say human a lot, but I think that's a bias that I carry, is I think the workplace should feel human. And we have a really long way to go for it to really get to that level because of how our systems are built today. And so there are two things that I would do whenever I would join a startup. And keep in mind, like these are like seed to Series B. So they're a little bit smaller stage startups. Is I would speak with every single person at the company. Sometimes it would take me months. Sometimes I could do it in a month, depending on the size of the team. And this was important for me for two reasons. One is to start to develop meaningful connection with that other human being and start to create that foundation of trust. And the second piece is to learn about them as humans. What do they care about? What do they love? What do they long for? What inspires or motivates them? And this is a really powerful practice because it helps you understand their motivators and how you can contribute it to your people strategy. So how do we connect this into the way that we lead the people function so people feel seen, heard, and valued, while we're also connecting it into the business of what are the priorities that we need to be focusing on and how can we use the motivators of these people to help move us in that direction. So this one, I saw this specific trait across all of the startups that I did this with is like impact. Impact was so important for people. So how could we put in different practices that would help them feel like they're having an impact? How do you link from the individual to team to company level? How do you visualize the progress a team has made? And that person can see the impact that they're having. That for me was really beautiful and it feels natural, right? It's a much more fluid way to approach it. But then I would pair it with the data side because I also believe data is really important. And so depending on the size of team, you might be smaller where you won't do this a full blown listening strategy, but I'm going to talk about the bigger ones that we would implement. Like this was once you're like above 50 people. And so I'm a big believer of weekly or biweekly pulse surveys. I don't like these like huge surveys that people have to spend a half an hour to fill out because they don't. And it also captures only one point in time. So you might do it for a baseline before you start. But I really love the ongoing pulse surveys because you can start to see trends over time. And you can also start to ask what happened at the company that's creating spikes or drops. And then you start to get to know the business a little bit better. At the same time, it also offers people a safe space to share how they're really feeling, right? There's always power dynamics. It doesn't matter how flat a hierarchy is. There's always a hierarchy. Doesn't matter. And so this is what can help us tweeze out the things that people will not say, or will say in a way where you don't really understand what they're meaning. And so this is like, I would implement this listening strategy and we'd focus on different categories, right? So this is something you can use with like Culture Amp or Lattice or 15.5. They have these, but then you can design them to the needs of your business. So tracking things like career development, psychological safety, DEI, trust in senior leadership, which is huge, engagement, manager effectiveness. There's a new category, which I love, which helps predict funding because perceptions of employees can precede funding for a company. And in a period where the investing has dried up a little bit in comparison to what it was, a lot of startups are struggling now when are we going to be able to get our next funding, which has led to a multitude of rounds of layoffs. And so how would I actually put this into practice? So each month, so transparency piece, Adam, each month I would share the company-wide results with the team. So it would be a Slack post with a link to a Notion page. And that page included high-level category scores, and it shows month-over-month changes. I would highlight 3 areas to celebrate, 3 areas to improve upon, and then related actions that we were taking on the people team and or senior leadership team as a result of what we're learning. And then we would also include the outcomes of the actions we had been taking. So ones that we were in progress, we would say like, this is what we're noticing or not. And they would always link back to the questions in the surveys, in the survey bank that we had. So we would create hypotheses and we could validate like, did our action actually make an impact or not? And then it would allow us to go a lot deeper if we needed to. And we could actually create like one-off pulse surveys where we would get really specific. We had issues with burnout, go figure, right? So 1 month was just questions, any and everything related to burnout. So we could understand, okay, what is the root cause of burnout on our team? So we can think about how we need to reprioritize what we're focusing on for the people team. So what was really cool to see as an outcome is there were a few things. So we consistently had high participation rates. So usually around 80 to 85% month over month. Normally it starts high and drops, but it actually would stay at a pretty stable level. Like a low month might be like 79%, but like it never dropped to the percentage that we would see for participation for the bigger surveys. So this helped because it helped us make sure that we were being more inclusive, especially for those who maybe were underrepresented groups in the organization, so that we were getting to hear their experiences and make sure that we were responding. And we actually had some really important things come up through those surveys that we wouldn't have been able to address otherwise. And the team would also vocalize on Slack that they loved the transparency. They felt they were appreciative, and they felt that the team was really committed to their success at the company. And that helped a ton in terms of engagement and really becoming ambassadors for the people team. Because I think one of the biggest challenges with a people team is you have to influence, but you don't have much authority. And so it's how can you really build this through other people versus trying to do it yourself. The second thing we saw is that we were able to prioritize or reprioritize our initiatives to address the trends that we were seeing. And then we can connect them into the business, and that in turn helped us make our impact more visible to the executive level of these are the things we've achieved. Here's actual quantitative data to show the impact that we've made, because when you're not a direct revenue generating team, it can be a lot more challenging. And so that was something that was really, really beneficial. And we can talk through engagement. We saw engagement scores increase through this. Some were really dramatic where they went like 23% in 6 months. Others were a little bit less, but it already had like a higher baseline. So it went from like 76 to I think like 83 or 84. But it was something that I think really can help with the trust on a team, and also this co-creation, because people start to take ownership around how they contribute to a culture, and we would connect that to them, and also like make sure we would equip the people managers of how to use this, how to talk through it with their teams as well. So it wasn't something just from the people team, but it was across the different levels of people leaders.
I'm curious about that, Rachel, because I love the approach, and I can see how at a certain size that's really doable. But it feels like as a company grows, and the bigger it grows, the need to have that filtered through those first line manager roles, so that those conversations are kept alive and not seen as that person on the senior team that we never see anymore. So what are your tools and tips around that growth piece and upskilling people at the middle manager level and the frontline manager level to be able to keep that work alive?
Yeah. So full like disclaimer, I have not worked at huge companies, so I can't give you like what you would do at like an 800 or 1,000 like headcount level company. But what I can say, the last one was 160. That's still a good amount of people, right? So we would work directly with our managers, and there's kind of two approaches. So one is building it into your onboarding, but you also need to have the foundation. Like, talking about developing our leaders, we need to make sure that they have the core skills of how to communicate as a leader. And like dealing with feedback, dealing with all of these things, right? Creating psychological safety. So we had different guides to help walk managers through it. We even created like transcripts for managers who hadn't done it before, who might not be comfortable just winging it. And they would use that to guide their initial conversations. And also I would offer like ad hoc coaching with them of, do you want to run through it together on your own, right? That's not always super scalable, but I think when you have a smaller team, taking that time, it's really beneficial, because that's what reinforces the behaviors on a team and the culture that you have, right? So it was like a combination of coaching, training, and having like supporting resources for them. And then the next piece is like training them into the tool itself, so they can see the analytics specifically for their team. And then depending on the categories, recommended questions that they can ask their team to help them up that score. So if they're worried about career development, where do I bring that? Is that in a team meeting? Is that in a one-on-one? And then what questions should I be asking to learn a little bit more so we can start to solve it? So it's something that the team is working on together, and it's still more nuclear at that point. You're not expanding out to 160 people if like our team design was, each group was a max of 7, right? So you've still got that in a fairly small group of people where people can have those conversations and create change at the level that works for them, because each team has very different circumstances and context to how their work works, that what works for one isn't going to work for the other. I have not officially launched my company website yet. It will be next week. So my little spiel about Boldly Unbounded is because that's what I've been focused on for like the last 2 months. So
everyone, let's celebrate Rachel's launch.